You've all heard that sound before. Every time you take a photo, the sound of the mirror flipping up and the shutter opening is unmistakable. And that shutter opening is what I want to talk to you about today. We're going to take a look at how understanding your shutter speed will give you more control and creative freedom over your photography. And we're going to go on location in Disney World to show you some real-world examples of shots taken at different shutter speeds. So if you're ready, let's get started. When we talk about shutter speed, what we're referring to is the amount of time that the shutter in your camera remains open to allow the exposure to take place. The shutter speed is a huge factor in determining your exposure, the other part of it being aperture. We're going to go into much greater depth on aperture and exposure in another video. So for purposes of this video, we're going to talk about shutter speed and how it affects your photograph. But what is the shutter? Well, it's basically like a plastic curtain in front of your sensor that blocks light from hitting the sensor until you're ready to take your photograph. When you take a photograph, that shutter opens for a set period of time, and that is your shutter speed. And just like any curtain, you can open and close that shutter for different periods of time. And how long that shutter remains open determines how much light hits your sensor. Now you should know that by doubling your shutter speed, let's say from 1/40th of a second to 1/20th of a second, it doubles the amount of light that hits your sensor. And conversely, if you cut your exposure in half, let's say from 1/100th of a second to 1/200th of a second, it's going to cut the amount of light in half that hits your sensor. Now for most general photography purposes, shutter speeds are very, very fast, like 1/100th of a second. But if that's not fast enough for you, you can shoot even faster, like 1/5000th of a second, or even faster. You can basically freeze a moment in time, even the fastest moving objects, by using a super fast shutter speed. But that's just one way that you can control your shutter speed to determine the look of your photograph. Another way is to purposely use a very slow shutter speed. A slow shutter speed like 1 second or 10 seconds or even hours can help you create photos in virtual darkness or help you blur moving objects to create a sense of motion. And that can be pretty fun to do. Bill and I were down in Disney World recently and we were talking about this and decided to put together a little video and show you some real world examples. So we headed for Disney's Animal Kingdom and had a little bit of fun. As soon as this ride starts spinning around, I'm going to snap off a few shots, freezing the motion, and you're going to see basically it looks like a nice shot, but those Triceratops dinosaurs are frozen in place. You don't really get a sense of what's going on other than it looks like a nice photograph. Really the fun and the action and the atmosphere that's going on here, especially in a place like Chester and Hester's Dino-Rama, is there's activity, there's action, there's all these things going on, there's things spinning over there, there's people screaming over there, a lot of fun, a lot of excitement, and that's what we're going to capture in the motion is this kinetic activity that's going on all the time. So again, I'm going to snap off a couple of shots, freezing the motion, takes the exposure up to 1 second. And you can see what it looks like. You can see the motion in the dinosaurs, you can see what's going on, and then I'm also going to stop down and get my shutter speed even longer, down to 8 seconds. And you can see what a completely blurred image looks like as these things rotate all the way around. You can see the difference between 1 second and 8 seconds is a big difference. Not satisfied with the first shot, I thought of a different composition. I put a wide angle lens on, got really close in, and tried a couple of other fun examples. And you'll notice I was using a tripod there. That's the Fisol CT3441S. Bill and I both use it. It's a great travel tripod. I put a link to it in the description below. And since we're talking about tripods, you have to be aware that when you're shooting at slower shutter speeds, you're going to need to keep your camera steady. The longer or more telephoto your lens is, the faster your shutter speed needs to be to avoid camera shake. Here's a great rule of thumb to keep in mind. If you're using, let's say, a 100mm lens, you're going to want a shutter speed of 1/100th or faster in order to avoid camera shake. If you're using a 35mm lens, you're going to want a shutter speed of, let's say, 1/35th of a second or faster to avoid shake. It doesn't work in every situation, but it's a good rule of thumb. Anything slower than that, and you're going to have to find a way to support your camera, either by propping it on something or using a tripod. Now, supports and tripods come in all shapes and sizes. I'm going to link my favorites in the description below, so you can click on those and check out the different kinds that I use. But I will say that a tripod is extremely important in developing your photography, and you really should be carrying one with you at all times. So let's take a look at some of the nuts and bolts of how this works and how you control shutter speed on your camera. Turn your command dial to the TV setting, which is shutter speed priority. Now you can simply turn the dial to get whatever shutter speed you want. And while you change your shutter speed, the camera's automatically going to change your aperture to try to maintain the correct exposure. So a really fast shutter speed like this will freeze motion, while shutter speeds in the middle range, like 1/60th of a second, 1/200th of a second, are really good for most situations. But when you want to go longer, put your camera on a tripod and set it for a longer exposure, like 1 second or more. You can get really creative with long exposures. And long exposures aren't just for nighttime or indoor shots. You can really use it any time of day and get some fun effects. So take your camera out and try some different shutter speed settings. Get some shots of the same moving subject at different shutter speeds to see how the photograph is affected. Remember, I always recommend shooting every single day. Even if you're just sitting at home, take out your camera, take shots of things, experiment with different shutter speeds, and really get to know how your camera works. So once you understand how to set your shutter speed and how those shutter speeds affect the look of your photograph, you can really take more control and be more creative in getting the kind of photograph that you want. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you have any questions or anything you want to tell us, put it in the comments below. We always love to hear from you. So thanks for watching and happy shooting.